Once upon a time, in the great Kanuri kingdom, lived a man named Ahmed. A few years ago, Ahmed borrowed a huge sum of money from his best friend Abdul, promising to pay back in a few years' time. Not long afterwards, a war broke out between their village and the neighboring villages. Following the war, Ahmed never saw his friend Abdul again. He searched around, but Abdul was nowhere to be found. He asked other villagers, but everyone seemed oblivious about the whereabouts of Abdul. Some even suggested that Abdul might be dead, and this was a devastating time for Ahmed, who latched onto the hope that his friend Abdul could be alive somewhere. As the years went by, Ahmed got married to a very beautiful woman in their village named Aisha. She was the daughter of a very rich man. They met during the war as Ahmed saved Aisha from the hands of some very dangerous men. When the war was finally over and everyone reconnected, Aisha realized that her father and mother were dead. Aisha and her sister Habiba were the only survivors in her family, and when Ahmed got to know about this, he made it his duty to look after them. Ahmed and Aisha soon fell in love, and Ahmed asked her to marry him. Their marriage ceremony was conducted, and Aisha moved into Ahmed's home with her sister Habiba. After several months, Aisha got pregnant and gave birth to a very beautiful girl called Rahila. Tragedy struck their household a few years later as Aisha died of a brief illness, leaving her daughter with no mother. Before Aisha died, she pleaded with her husband Ahmed that if anything ever happened to her, that he should not hesitate to marry her sister Habiba. Ahmed was shocked at her request, and before he could ask Aisha her reasons, she gave up the ghost. Marrying Habiba was Aisha's dying wish, so Ahmed, after burying his beloved wife, decided to respect his wife by marrying Habiba. He called Habiba one day and informed her of her sister's dying wish. Habiba was shocked to hear this, and after careful thought, she decided to marry Ahmed. Rahila was still a very young girl at the time. She grew up knowing Habiba as her mother, and Habiba soon got pregnant and gave birth to twin girls named Zainab and Jamila. Rahila and Habiba's twin daughters grew up so fast, and Rahila was extremely beautiful like her late mother Aisha. She played musical instruments so well, and this was shocking to her family, who wondered how Rahila was able to play any instrument of her choice without ever practicing. One evening, Ahmed was returning home when he received the shocker of his life. He saw his best friend Abdul standing in front of his house. Ahmed could not believe his eyes. He approached Abdul and asked where he had been all these years. Abdul did not seem excited to see Ahmed. He was more concerned about the money he borrowed Ahmed before the war broke out many years ago. Ahmed explained to Abdul that he lost the money during the war and had no money currently to repay. He pleaded with Abdul to give him time to repay his debt. As they were talking, Rahila returned home and met them outside. She could sense tension in the air and wondered who the strange-looking man was. After a few minutes, her father came into the house, and Rahila could not help but ask what the problem was. Her father smiled at her and assured her that there was no problem. Although Rahila pretended to believe her father, She was, however, not convinced with her father's response. As the days went by, Ahmed began to think so much, and Rahila, his daughter, noticed that the thinking began after the strange visit her father received. So she decided to get to the root of everything. Rahila set out that afternoon without telling anyone where she was going. Night came, and Rahila had not returned. Her family was so worried, so they set out in search of her, but she was nowhere to be found. Days passed, and still no one had seen or heard from Rahila. Months and even years passed, and Rahila's father made thinking his way of life. The brunt of thinking had begun to take a toll on his health, and all he hoped and wished for was to see his daughter again before he died. It has been 5 years since the disappearance of Rahila, and her father was still hopeful that one day she would definitely return. Her sisters got married and moved out of their father's house to go live with their husbands. One evening, Ahmed and Habiba heard a knock on their door. Rahila had returned, and her father Ahmed could not believe his eyes. Habiba too was in shock, as it had been 5 years since they saw Rahila last. Tears of joy filled their eyes as they reconnected. Rahila could not believe the state of her father's health, which had deteriorated so badly. Habiba then asked Rahila where she had been all this while, and Rahila began to tell them her story. She revealed that on the day that she did not return, she went out in search of Abdul, the man that her father owed a great debt. She asked around for Abdul and was directed to the neighboring village where he lived. When she got to Abdul's house, she met Abdul, who laughed and said to her, "So your father agreed to send you to me after all?" Rahila was so confused and asked Abdul what he was talking about. It was then that Abdul revealed to her that her father Ahmed owed him a huge amount of money and has been unable to pay. Abdul also said that he offered Rahila's father the option of sending Rahila to him to work for 10 years as a means of repaying the debt, but her father refused and offered himself instead. When Rahila heard this, she was heartbroken as everything began to make more sense to her. Rahila then asked Abdul how long she would have to work for him to repay the debt, and Abdul revealed that the debt was huge and that only 10 years of service would suffice. Rahila's heart sank as she could not imagine being apart from her family for 10 whole years. She pleaded with Abdul to permit her to go home to alert her family of her decision, but Abdul refused, saying that if Rahila returns home, her serving time would increase from 10 to 15 years. Rahila was short of words and did not know what to do. She then decided to begin her 10-year journey of repaying her father's debt. Rahila then became Abdul's captive, who worked tirelessly and barely got enough rest in a day. Her only motivation was the fact that her father would be relieved of the debt after 10 years. One day, this was 5 years later, Abdul's only son fell terribly ill. No treatment was effective in healing his sickness, and this terrified his father Abdul, who did not know what to do. Malik was his only successor, and Abdul was ready to do anything to save Malik's life. One night, Rahila was asleep when she saw a beautiful woman in her dream. The woman revealed that her name was Aisha and that she was Rahila's mother. Aisha told Rahila that she had great powers that she had not yet tapped into. She revealed that it was Rahila's powers that made it possible for her to play musical instruments even without practicing. Aisha told her daughter to mix some herbs together and drink, and that her powers would be unleashed. She then told Rahila to take care of herself as she disappeared into the night. Rahila woke up confused. She could not believe that she finally got the chance to see her mother again. When morning came, Rahila prepared the herbs and drank of its water. She felt an unusual sensation all over her body as a bright light emanated from her hands and disappeared. Rahila knew at that point that her powers had been activated. She approached Abdul and told him of her ability to heal his son. Rahila then went on to tell Abdul that she would heal his son Malik on the condition that Abdul grants her early release and a complete cancellation of her father's debt. Abdul looked at her in shock. He was so desperate at that point and promised Rahila that he would do whatever she has asked for if she is able to heal his son. Rahila then stepped forward and placed her hands over his son's body, and a bright light emanated from her hands. Abdul's son miraculously regained his health, and Abdul's eyes shone in amazement. Abdul then promised Rahila of her release the next morning, and Rahila retired to bed that night extremely excited. She could not wait to see her family after 5 years of being away. In the morning, when Rahila went to meet Abdul to facilitate her release, Abdul laughed and said that Rahila was going nowhere. Rahila's mouth opened in shock as she reminded Abdul of his promise to her the previous day. It was then that Abdul revealed that his focus was not on the debt that Ahmed owed to him, but on making Ahmed suffer for what he did many years ago. Abdul revealed that he was secretly in love with Aisha, Rahila's late mother, before the war, and noticed that Ahmed picked an interest in Aisha during the war. Abdul revealed that he could not stand the sight of Aisha being with his best friend Ahmed, so he left their village to the neighboring village during the war, telling no one of his whereabouts. Abdul vowed to make Ahmed pay for what he did by keeping his daughter away from him. He then ordered that Rahila be locked up in a room and not allowed freedom. Rahila wept and pleaded with Abdul to have mercy on her, but his mind had already been made up. For months, Rahila was locked up in the room, only given food once a day. This continued for months till one fateful day. Rahila heard a sound at the door. She looked in anticipation and saw Abdul, who came in with a strange man. She asked what they wanted, and the man revealed that he was sent by the king to fetch her. The king had heard about how Rahila healed Abdul's son and demanded to see her immediately. His wife, the queen, was extremely sick and about to die, so the king pleaded with Rahila to save her life. He promised to grant her anything she so wished if she successfully restored his wife's health. Rahila demanded that she be pronounced free from serving Abdul after she had successfully healed the queen, and the king agreed to her request. After Rahila healed the queen, the king ordered that no one should ever hold Rahila captive again. The king also told her that if she ever wanted anything, that she should not hesitate to come to him. Rahila was so excited and returned back to her village to go see her family. When she returned and saw the state of her father's health, she stretched out her hands and healed him. Rahila's father regained his health and everyone was so happy. A few days later, Rahila received a visit from the prince of the neighboring village, whose mother she had healed earlier. The prince was so grateful to Rahila for saving his mother's life and decided to come thank her himself. He brought so many gifts, and as they talked, he began to pick an interest in Rahila. As time went on, the prince told Rahila about his feelings for her, and Rahila also revealed to the prince that she also had feelings for him. Not long afterwards, Rahila and the prince got married in a grand ceremony attended by so many people. When Abdul heard that the prince had gotten married to Rahila, he was so ashamed of how he treated her. He decided to pay a visit to Rahila's father Ahmed to seek for forgiveness. Abdul knew that Ahmed had no idea that he was in love with Aisha before the war, so he felt a pang of guilt for all his actions, which put his longtime best friend Ahmed through so much pain. That was how a once bitter story turned sweet, and Rahila became the princess of the neighboring village. The lesson to be learned from this story is that bottled up feelings and anger can result in strained friendships and relationships. We should learn to abstain from doing things that will hurt the people that care so much about us. And in cases where we believe someone has hurt us, we should also learn to discuss these issues to find a resolve. Also, most disappointments in life can actually be a blessing in disguise. So do not be downcast when you are faced with disappointing situations. I hope you enjoyed the story. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It helps us grow our channel. I'll see you in our next story. Bye.